So I would like to welcome all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Dora. I'm joining you from Budapest, from Hungary, and it's lovely to have you all here. You can also find here Sebastian, who is the other Qesher organizer. It's the two of us who started this project 5.5 years ago now. And our mission is to share Jewish culture, history, and also the present day situation of Jewish communities around the world. So many of you I know have attended many of our events in the past. Most regularly, we introduce different cities or countries' Jewish heritage. And I'm sure that all of you who are here today know that we also have a book club, which is not a book club in the sense that you are not expected to have read the book that we introduce, but it's more of a book club to raise awareness of books related to our overall umbrella theme, which is Jewish life around the world. Today, we are very happy to welcome Jennifer Krebs, who is the author of Stumbling Blocks. And this is the book that she's going to share and speak about with us today. She's a writer based in the San Francisco Bay Area and New York's Catskills Mountains. A second generation Holocaust descendant, she draws on her family's lived experience to explore the legacy of memory, trauma, and resilience. She has traveled to visit her family's homes in Europe. She has been speaking about her Jewish identity and second generation experience since her childhood. She is semi-retired from a career working to study and protect the natural resources of the Bay Area. Stumbling Blocks is her debut memoir. And now I'm going to pass the word to Jennifer, who is going to share with us in a presentation about this book. She's also going to read to us a little bit. And after that, we'll open up for questions and answers. So please feel free to put in the chat your thoughts and questions, and we'll have time after her presentation to address them. So Jennifer, please share with us about your book.
Good afternoon, everybody. First off, I know some of you. It's nice to see Susan Ethan in Rochester and Liz Dougherty in DC and Ted Shappus in California, and there's somebody on in Berlin. And Dora and Sebastian, I've spoken to a few times. I feel like they're old friends already. Also, and I know I haven't said everybody's name who I know on here, but it's nice to meet all of you and connect over Zoom. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation right here. And so this is a copy of the, whoops, see, I'm already messed up. This is a copy of my book cover as well as some stumbling blocks. And many of you on the phone probably already know that Stumbling Blocks is a project started by Gunter Demnig in Germany. He started it, I believe, in Berlin. And there's thousands of these little stumbling blocks throughout Europe showing the last known residents that people chose who fled the Holocaust or were deported because of the Nazis and collaborators. So I've got the contrast of, you can see I had a childhood in the middle of nowhere, Spencerport, New York. I drove a tractor from time to time to pick up hay. My dad was a cattle dealer. That's my dad on the far right, and my uncle Fritz. And this was I don't think it was quite my debut on the tractor. It probably should have been my finale. I wasn't very good at it. But anyhow, so that's a memory from childhood. And on the right, I have some of the Stolpersteiner from the little town of what's now called Bad Berleburg, which is then was called Berleburg, where my dad was born and lived until he immigrated to the U.S. at age 12. I'll give you a little bit more of that. So I named the book Stumbling Blocks partially because of the Stolpersteiner and partially because I feel like part of growing up is we all have our own stumbling blocks and we trip and fall. And one of them for me was the Holocaust, trying to make sense of this enormous historical event, which really was profound in my family and talked about at all family gatherings. And it wasn't as if we talked about it over dinner each night, but all my relatives had slightly different memories. And there was a great sense of loss for those who did not immigrate to the US. And I'm guessing that those of you who are members of Qesher or who just came to listen in today, you're also thinking about history and its impacts on us today and wondering what's next for the world at large. So that's the reason for the title. And again, thank you to Dora and Sebastian and all of you for joining me today. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about story, mystery, history, and legacy, starting in Germany, moving to Spencerport, talking a little bit about memorials and a little bit about writing a memoir. So this is a picture of my grandfather and his siblings. He grew up in the province of Westphalia, we call it in English, a little town near the Hesse border. And here it is on the map. It's a little bit north of Frankfurt. And there's my grandfather. I believe he's in his World War One uniform. And this must have been the week or two before he met my grandmother because the first thing she did was make him get rid of the mustache. She didn't believe in facial hair. Um, and this is a couple of pictures from Balaberg. On the right here, there is a castle in town, and not the current Duke, or first is the word in German, but the previous one was very much a conservationist and tried to bring back buffalo, which apparently were like prehistoric animals. Anyhow, they now the town's website, if you go there, shows the buffalo. And I have an overview picture. Anyhow, it's a charming little town. I've been there a few times. And my family was there back at least into the early 1800s. This is a letter that the archivist of Balaberg sent me. It is the sale. It's a letter about the sale of a cow that my great grandfather, I'm sorry, sold in May of 1918. So this is in the town's archives. We don't have archives like this in the U.S. And they also had a copy in the town's archives. This is my dad's oldest sister, Lucy, her poesy album, which is actually like the diary that Anne Frank wrote in was a poesy album. They were common with girls when they got to a certain age. And this says, I guess my aunt received this in 1934. This is my grandmother. She was born about 45 minutes away from Balaberg in Hesse province in a town called Rudenau. And this is about the furthest back picture I have of her. I do have, she had twin brothers, were the last siblings, and that's the second to the last sibling. So this is what they looked like in Rudenau in, I don't know, 1910 maybe. And my dad is he's the only boy. He had two older sisters, and this is what his childhood looked like. It was pretty ordinary. In the town of Balaberg, the houses are made out of slate, and that's why they're those dark colors. And my dad's life and his sisters and lives changed a lot in November on 1938. I put this slide up on the far right. It gives some of the towns in Germany where they had pogroms, which we call Kristallnacht, on November 9th and 10th. And the picture on the left, I've also reprinted in the book. It is in the Washington, D.C. Holocaust Memorial. It was found by this fellow, Karl Hermann Volker, in the area of Rudenow. Anyhow, this was an old BMW that had been driven by the Hebrew school teacher in Frankenberg, which is where the Jewish synagogue was. And they basically killed the Hebrew school teacher, and they drove the car into a lake. This is what is written in this book that I read. They drove the car into the lake, and that, or maybe before they put it in the lake, they let it looks like the local Boy Scout troop pose on the car of this religious school teacher, religious leader of the community. And, it just kind of shows you, kids. I don't know. You could imagine this anywhere in the world. Kids are told, here's our activity for the afternoon. We're going to jump on the car of the Hebrew teacher who we just, you know, abducted. And I don't know if he was in jail at this point or if he was already dead, but it's kind of sobering the level of uh, harassment, fear, and deadliness that was unleashed in November of 1938. My dad was still 9 at the time. He only had one teacher in Germany who was a Nazi and harassed him every day. So my grandparents, after this happened, they decided to send their children off to Belgium. My grandmother had a sister in Belgium. These are the documents for getting a visa to go on the Kinder transport. And they got on a train in Cologne and got off in Brussels. And then they were met at the station by my uncle. And they were taken to the town of Mechelen. And this is my grandmother's sister, Matilda, her husband, Hugo, and their daughter, Laura. And on the right are their Stolpersteiner in Frankfurt. Hugo apparently was a very good industrialist. He employed over 100 people in 1935, which is an awful lot of people, I would think, in those days. They made furniture. The business was ultimately, he had to sell the business to somebody who apparently, I was in Frankfurt over the summer, and I met these folks who do the Stolpersteiner project in Frankfurt, and they were telling me that the furniture label that my uncle started and then this fellow bought became the IKEA of the 1950s in Germany, and that everybody had this Karl Kubel furniture, which was this Karl Kubel bought it from my uncle Hugo. Anyhow, he had been forced to sell to the Nazis, and he moved to the town of Mechelen. On the right, you can see the city center. Mechelen was the furniture building area of Belgium at the time. The house on the bottom right is where my dad lived. It was described to me as a child as a palace, which goes to show you that sometimes our parents' memories are not exactly accurate. So that house does not look like a palace. I also went to Hugo and Matilda's house in Frankfurt, not a palace. On the left are those Belgians who were killed in the Shoah. I attended a Qesher program last month about the Jews in Belgium. I don't know if Eitan Bergman's here today, but there were not that many Jews in Belgium. And in Mechelen, where my dad and his sisters lived after the Kinder transport, after my dad and his sisters went back to Germany, and I talk about this in the book too. I found documents. There were exactly 8 Jews left in Mechelen. It was not a Jewish place. There was no synagogue. But anyhow, this is where my father lived for 2 years. And on the right, you're seeing a picture of the Kaserne de San transit camp, which I visited this summer. My grandmother's sister, who took care of my dad and his two older sisters. She and her husband and daughter were transported um, to Auschwitz from there in early 1943. And I think among things that I was aware of as a child that kind of fomented in me for many years was my grandmother never got to thank this sister for taking care of her children for 2 years after Kristallnacht. Um, Many of the kids, I'm sure many of you know that many more children went to England. I think England took about 10,000 kids under kinder transport. But in Belgium, those who went there, some like my dad and his sisters were able to get out, and some wound up going to Auschwitz. The Belgians also had, this is what I heard in Belgium, a pretty good success rate in hiding people. So some Jews did survive the Shoah in Belgium. Then my dad, after the Germans invaded Belgium when they were trying to get to France in May 1950, my dad and his aunt, they fled. They tried to flee the Nazis, were unsuccessful, and ultimately my dad returned to his parents in Germany. And he was able to immigrate to the US in 1941, just before his 13th birthday. But some people of his family did not get out. On the far left is his first cousin, Ruth, who was left behind, and his aunt, Adela. More on her in a minute. And then that's my grandmother on the far right. And in addition, this is my grandmother's family tree that somebody made in Germany. Anyhow, my grandmother lost, in addition to the sister who was in Belgium, she lost her brother. He was basically also attacked at Kristallnacht, and these are two of his daughters. He had one more daughter who was also killed, and his wife as well. Their oldest son made it to the US. So this is me as a kid with my dad and sister, and with my grandma. I didn't intentionally leave my mother out, but anyhow, this is just a few family pictures from my dad's side of the family. My mom was born in New York City, so she was learning about the Holocaust as she went to. Um, and when when my junior year of college, I decided to go study in Europe. I was studying international relations, and I had wanted to improve in French, so I went to France. And my parents came over to visit me during spring break. And my dad, who really wasn't all that excited about the idea of me going to Europe in the first place, was like, well, now we're going to go to Germany. So we went to Germany, and we went to Balaberg, and that's the top picture. And then I went back a year later. My grandmother, who is in the bottom left picture with her friend from Balaberg, who she knew from before the war, Elizabeth Bald. This is the two of them, and that's me at roughly the same age. I think that picture is in Cologne on the way to Balaberg. But anyhow, so I went there, and I was surprised because I'd always felt in the US that people had a hard time talking about things that went poorly in US history, such as slavery, such as killing Indians, and frankly, such as what happened during World War II and turning Japanese and the Korean War. And I always felt like people had a hard time saying, we did this that was good, we did this that was bad, I'm sorry about this. These are obviously issues that are still being talked about. But I was very surprised when I got to Germany that there, amongst the people who I met, and obviously I did not meet the many millions of people who live there, but much more openness to talk frankly about the Holocaust, and you know, they too, uh, wanted to have frank discussions and wanted to move forward. Again, I don't think this was the situation in 1945, but by 1978, when I got there, that's where the country was, in my estimation. And I returned home with this sense of obligation. Around the same time, on the left, Helen Epstein was doing work, Children of the Holocaust. She was a therapist and she interviewed other children of Holocaust survivors and talked about what they saw. About 20 years later, Art Spiegelman published the book Mouse, which I'm sure many of you read, talking about his father's experience. More recently, the book Survivor Cafe came out by Elizabeth Rossner. She talks about her father's Holocaust experience and on and on and on. But I think many people shared this sense of obligation that we need to we need to honor our relatives and we need to prevent these atrocities from happening in the future. And I just put this up here kind of for comic relief. That's me, my father, and my aunt. You can see there's a strong family resemblance. I tried to get roughly the same age. So I wanted to talk a little bit about memorials. So on the left is a memorial with the Jewish star on top. That memorial was built in Baalberg around the year 2000, I think 1999. And on the right is my aunt is addressing the crowd at the dedication of this memorial, and next to her is the mayor, I believe it's the mayor of the town. And my aunt worked with some people. My aunt, let me just pause for a second here. My dad's older sister, Lucy, um, she went through school in Belgium. She was in Belgium until the age 16. And when she got to the US, her parents sent her to work right away. She wasn't able to finish high school. Eventually, she married and she and her husband moved to Japan. And there she started learning Japanese and became an expert ultimately in Japanese Buddhist art. And starting in the 70s, when she went back to Germany with me, she took an interest in in this town and really was pushing people. She wanted to know what happened to people who she knew there, both people who she was friendly with, people she wasn't friendly with, and she started lifelong relationships, and one of the outgrowths of this was pushing people to have a memorial to the Jews who from the town who were killed. So she did that. I'm in the picture. You can see my back looking at the memorial. And so this is in the Jewish cemetery in Belleburg. And then moving up a little bit more recently, over the last few years, Ulrich Bergmoser, who may be on this Zoom, he worked with people he wanted to dedicate a bridge to my great aunt Adela, whose picture you saw earlier with my grandmother. The newspaper article in the middle shows a picture of Adela in, I guess, the early 30s. She's in front of a planetarium. I forget which city it's in. But in any event, she died. She became disabled in the 30s, and she was sent off to Theresienstadt, where she died. And Ulrich worked with people to try to get a bridge named after her. And there was political controversy, and they decided not to name the bridge after her. They decided to call it the Bridge Against Forgetting, and they named several people who they wanted to honor. And again, I'm not in, that's my dog, excuse me. Um, I hope you don't hear too much barking. Anyhow, so this memorial is not just the Holocaust memorial now, but you can see on the right the people standing on the bridge against forgetting. And so this is a map showing some of the Stolpersteine. There's 42 of them in Berleburg. So this is a website done by the province of Nordrhein-Westfalen. And you can go on the internet. I think it's Stolpersteine ND NRD. And you can look up about different people who throughout the province. And I think this website is mainly for school children who are, I don't know that much about it, but I don't know if it's an optional project or a mandatory project, but school kids throughout the province now look up about people who were deported or killed in the Holocaust and write reports on them. So I thought that was an interesting memorial. And this is an organization in the US, Widen the Circle, and I'm making a small donation from the sales of my book to this organization. I kind of love this tagline, fighting bigotry, starting with history. And they fund projects in Germany to do Holocaust remembrance, and they fund projects throughout the US to also do history of enslaved people. And anyhow, they have some pretty interesting projects and I support them. And I wanted to talk a little bit, and then I'll read a small amount from my book and answer questions. But I wanted to talk about writing a memoir because I went to one of these book groups that Dora and Sebastian had a few months ago. I forget which book it was, but I noticed there were a lot of people that asked the author how she wrote the memoir and what was involved with writing a memoir and how did you do the research. And for me, the research was really easy because I can sit on the computer and go to Yad Vashem and get lots of documents, and I can go to there's all kinds of websites with information. And if you tell me, gee, you should go look at in a library hither or thither, I'm always happy to do that. But the emotional work of writing a memoir, I kept getting the feedback, you can't just tell us stories about your father, you have to tell us stories about you. What did you go through? What was your journey? And that was really hard because, I found that I still have a lot of pain about these things that happened before I was born because I heard about them so often as a child. They felt like my own stories, even though I wasn't there. And I think at one point I thought, oh, well, I'm going to do all this and then clean my hands and I'll be done with that, move on to the next chapter of my life. But what I came to was that it's really not a one and done, it's a rinse and repeat. And these tropes from history just stay with us. And then after you're done with the writing, Dora and Sebastian are in this now, then you get to find a publisher, which is its own project. And publishing a book takes, 6 months to 6 years, depending upon how your publisher does things. And then you have to find an audience, which I appreciate all of you here today helping me find an audience. And I'm happy to, widen the circle. I'm going to show a slide. You're more than welcome to get in touch with me. I'd be happy to come to your synagogue or church in the US. And like I say, I like to travel. I'd be happy to go other places. It's my way of kind of paying it forward and paying it backward. Um, so let me just read a little bit from my book. And in case you want to, here's my contact information. I thought I'd read a few paragraphs. This chapter is called Children of the Holocaust. And so, on one hand, I started writing this book around the time of COVID. On the other hand, I really got engaged in this family story when I went to Germany with my grandmother and my aunt in 1979 as my college graduation present. I filled 2 pages of my Balaberg notebook with a family tree of my father's side of the family that I made the day after a trip to Rudenow. Grandma had an amazing memory for who married who, maiden names, and birthdays, going to her second and third cousins, as well as my grandpa's whole family. My family tree followed the method that I had learned in the 9th grade in high school. I'm not sure if it was part of the New York State curriculum or if my teacher had taken a genealogy course and decided to share. In those days, long before the internet with Genie.com or Family Tree Maker, this tree was my guide to remembering what my grandmother told me about who I met in Balaberg and Rudenow. I kept ruminating on what happened to my great aunt Adela, how awful it must have been for her to have been left behind, how haunting it must have been for my grandfather to have left his sister. This single story seemed to me the pebble thrown out into a pond that sent ripples out to my father and his 2 older sisters, and then to my generation, leaving a loved one behind because she couldn't walk and couldn't get a visa. It seemed unspeakably sad and painful. My Aunt Lucy kept a picture of Adela in her stairwell. I think of her whenever I climb the steps to my bedroom, she said. In the early 2000s, she spoke to an academic high school in Balaberg about Adela and Elizabeth Bald, the woman who took care of her until Adela was transported to Theresienstadt. These are my Aunt Lucy's words. A truly heroic Balaberger was Frau Elizabeth Bald, geborn in Val, at whose parents' house we Krebs children celebrated Christmas. Elizabeth was my Tante Adela's most loyal friend. At the height of her career, Adela was in charge of the Edeka Geschäfte Balaberger branch, whose offices were opposite the old Bahnhof. When she was fired in 1933 for being Jewish, Adela's shock was so great she collapsed on the way home and remained confined to a wheelchair until her arrest in 1941-42. Adela died in Theresienstadt. Elizabeth Ball, disregarding all threats, took the Jewish woman into her house during the height of the Nazi period and stood by her. We knew the meaning of Zivilcourage. She knew the meaning of Zivilcourage and acted upon it. Once she even had words with the Ortsgruppenleiter who she asked for a clothing card for Adela. When he said Jews are not people and therefore needed no card, she contradicted him in no uncertain terms. Intelligent and straightforward as was her manner, Elizabeth argued with the authorities to the extent that they advised her husband to file for divorce. But that was in vain. Her husband stood by her. Poor Elizabeth Bald. She too had a palpable guilt that I remember from the time I saw her in Balaberg, as did her daughter, son-in-law, and grandson. More ripples from the pond. Finally, I took out a pen and started writing about Adela. Let me just say that some of what my aunt told the students, they've done research in Balaberg and found out that my great aunt actually stopped walking before the Nazis came. So this was a family story that wasn't quite true. Anyhow, but that was the story that I grew up on. And the next story I tell in the book is me trying to write about the Holocaust for the first time. But I'm at just about 40 minutes, and I think I'll stop here and answer questions because you may have some questions, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. This was a beautiful presentation, and thank you for sharing your story. There are indeed some questions, but if we have time at the end, maybe you can still read the passage that you were planning to. What do you think? Did or not? Okay. We can just go into questions. So I'll just read them in order as they came. The first one was about the furniture company of your uncle, and if you know if it was in a Bauhaus style or was it something different?
I think it was simple furniture for working people was the idea. I don't think it was high fashion, but again, I've never seen any pieces he made. When I was in Mechelen, this is my dog who's dying to be a part of the Zoom. When I was in Mechelen this past summer, I very much hoped I would be able to get into the house they lived in and see if there was anything like that. But nobody was home, so I didn't see that. And I really don't, I've never seen the furniture from the 30s, 20s and 30s when he owned it. But like I say, you can Google Karl Kubel furniture and see what they made in the 50s. And it's kind of a simple style, Scandinavian type.
Thank you. The next question was about the picture that you showed in Belgium. That was from Eitan's presentation, whether the people on this picture were dead because it was hard to see the exact details. So,
Sure. As far as I know, that what you're looking at that's lying on the ground in the middle was people's suitcases. And the people are standing around the outside. There, from what I read, they did have one of the people who worked there had an attack dog. And I'm sure some people died there, but it was primarily a transit camp for to send people off to Auschwitz.
thank you. There was a few questions about your father's journey, how he managed to make it to the US. If you could just walk us through one more time what
Sure.
happened exactly, Germany, Belgium, US, how did he make it out?
Yes. Okay. I know I was trying to speed through and give a lot of information. So my dad was sent at age 10 to Belgium and he lived there for 2 years. Um, what he said on the plus side of Belgium was he got an excellent education. When he got to New York, he had, I think, 6 months when he didn't know English, and then he got moved to a rapid class because his math from
Okay.
Belgium was far superior to what the Americans had. But anyhow, that's an aside. Once Belgium was run by the Nazis, my grandparents figured out a way to get their kids home. They had originally planned on going from Belgium to New York, but that got foiled by what happened with the invasion. So my dad and his sisters went back to Germany in the fall of 1940, sorry, 1940, yeah, 1940. They were there from 38 to 40. In 1941, in the spring, they got visas to go to New York, and they were on the second to the last train from Berlin to uh, Madrid, Spain. And from Madrid, they got to Portugal, and in Portugal, they got a boat to the US. That was their escape route. And it was legal, but like I say, there weren't many people who got out after them.
Thank you. And part of this question was also how did they know that they had to leave Belgium? And also if it was safe to go in 1940 to Belgium from Belgium to Germany.
No, it was not safe to go back from Belgium to Germany, and Germany and Belgium was unsafe. My uncle Hugo, or great uncle Hugo, apparently was arrested all the time by the police. And the Germans, they bombed Belgium. you might remember in World War One, there, the Brits and the French and the Germans all fought in Belgium, and it looked like they were going to do that again. Um, so, a brief aside, another story about my aunt. So, my dad and his sister Hilda were both under 16, and they could get visas to go back to Germany because they were children. My Aunt Lucy, however, was now 16. She was considered an adult, and the Nazis would not allow Jewish adults into Germany, period. So my aunt was stuck in Belgium, and she thought she was going to be, she basically thought that the aunt and uncle who she was living with in Belgium were going to get visas and they were going to leave her in Belgium. And she was like really very upset about that. She never really got over this aunt and uncle and how frightening of an experience it was. Anyhow, my grandmother apparently had a discussion with the mayor in Balaberg, and he wrote a letter to the Nazi in charge of Mechelen saying something to the effect of, if you release this girl back to Germany, then, this family is going to leave. They didn't have visas at that point. It wasn't clear they were going to leave. But in any event, my aunt was able to get on a train and go back to Germany. When she got to Germany, she was strip searched and cross examined for 2 hours in Aachen. Welcome back. And anyhow, but she did make it back to her parents, and they were all able to immigrate together. But it was a very frightening time for all of them.
Thank you. The next question is about Poland. I don't know if you have any information, but do you know if there are Stolpersteine in Poland, or in general, if you want to share with us a bit where people can find Stolpersteine, or if
Um,
that was
I
part of your
think
research?
I think they are in pretty much every country in Europe. I could be wrong. I was in Poland in 2018, and I don't remember seeing any. I honestly don't know. But I've seen them in Norway, in France, in Belgium. Well, not, no, I actually didn't. Maybe I saw one or two in Belgium. It's an uneven distribution, but I believe they're in many countries, and I'm sure you can go to the Stolpersteine website and look that up, but I don't have for sure information on Poland.
Actually, a part of the question or comment was that Betty, who wrote it, that she was in Poland in 2012 and she doesn't remember seeing them. And you also now mentioned that you were in 2018 and not remembering seeing them. So it will be interesting. If anyone knows, please feel free to put it in the chat. We do have them in Hungary, but I also don't remember in Poland whether they have it. It's a very interesting question. The next question is from Diane. Were you and your relatives at all reluctant to return to Germany and your hometown? How did you feel when you arrived at Berlinberg?
Okay, well that's a great question. And I would say that everybody in my family felt slightly different about it. Um, I was afraid to be, I actually, before I went to Balaberg, I had a weekend in Germany with some acquaintances in Trier. They were also on a language program, and I spent a weekend in Trier at the house of people I didn't know who were Germans. And as I say, I had the most wonderful discussion with them, even though I spoke like no German. They were speaking to me in English about the Holocaust. And, like I said, I was really moved by how open they were. So I was pretty eager to go to Balaberg with my dad. Um, he was not he one of the chapters I have in the book, I say my dad was good at the poker face, did not want to let on how he was feeling. I think he was terrified when he went there. One of the things that happened was he got locked in this hotel. They locked it so you couldn't exit. and he couldn't sleep and got up and wanted to go for a walk. He couldn't get out of the hotel, and he had like a panic attack that lasted the entire day about being, imprisoned in Belleville. And, obviously that wasn't quite what was going on, but that was how he felt. I think my Aunt Lucy had some good memories from her childhood and wanted to go back, like I say, and see what could be repaired and what could be done to prevent stuff in the future. My Aunt Hilda didn't go there until 2000 when they had the memorial. And I think my Aunt Hilda's three daughters and my Aunt Lucy's son were all had different kinds of anxieties about going to Germany, but and I think we all have slightly different feelings about it. So I don't really want to speak for any of them, but I don't think we're all in lockstep about our feelings.
Thank you so much. The next question is from Robin, who I think you may know. She says, Hi, Jenny. I loved how you interwove your stories with your families. Did you find that researching and writing the book helped you understand your father and aunts, and bring you closer?
I definitely felt like yes, I learned a lot about my dad, thinking of him and thinking about what he went through and trying to write. So I kind of write the book. I don't write the book. It's kind of my first person, and then there's some third person narration. But I had drafts of the book where I had my dad in first person, and I really tried to get inside his head as to what it was like. And I think that helped me enormously. Thinking about him being a little boy, because when I knew him, he was, close to 6 feet tall, close to 200 pounds. I really, in spite of the pictures, I just thought of him as like this fixed object, not as this frightened child.
Thank you so much. I'm just reading out some, or not reading out, but just sharing some comments that came into the chat that people spoke about Poland's relationship with the Stolpersteine, that apparently there was some reluctance in Poland to encourage them, but there are a few, but not many. Um, and there are in Germany and other European countries, you can find much more. Uh, yeah, so there's a whole discussion about this in different cities, different countries. So those of you who are interested, you're welcome to read all these comments. I'm just trying to see if there are other questions to Jennifer. You're also welcome to raise your hands and unmute if anyone feels like asking that way.
Jennifer, sorry, this is me, Sebastian. I remember when we spoke with you the first time, if I remember well, you mentioned that when you were even younger, you were already thinking about this subject and you were planning to write something, but you were disencouraged by members of your family telling you that this is not your story to tell, that this is like their story, and that that you felt like they didn't want you to kind of because you didn't live through it, like somehow you didn't have the right to write about it. Am I correct? This is something that happened, and what made you change, or what made them change their mind about it later to kind of be okay with it?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question too. So today's answer, which might not be yesterday's and might not be tomorrow's, is I felt that I needed my aunt in particular was very upset when I tried to write about this. She felt very strongly, like just the brief story I talked about her at in Aachen and being cross-examined by the Nazis. She felt these were her stories. The idea of me potentially casting her aunt and uncle who took care of her as heroes, when she saw them as awful people who were really mean to her, she just didn't want it reframed and didn't kind of thought, what right do you have? That was really what she said to me. But I also feel like she was somebody who was very dedicated to history, as was my father and their other sister and everybody in my family, and that overall they're gone. If I don't write this down, it's not there. What I should also mention though, Sebastian, that I didn't say before, is quite a few members of my family were recorded for oral Holocaust history projects. My dad and my Aunt Lucy are in Yale. My dad has two cousins who were in Bergen-Belsen, and theirs is in USC Shoah. They talk about their family. I have another family member who was interviewed in San Francisco. His is also, and these are kind of, yes, you can go and listen to these Holocaust testimonies, but there's not very many people living. I will say Susan Eason, my good friend, is on the phone. She was born in Berlin, and wonderful to see her today. She was friends with my parents for many years until my parents died. Anyhow, there's just not that many Holocaust survivors, and I felt an obligation to tell what I knew, however imperfect it is.
Thank you so much. And now, like from the question and how you were speaking about it, it raised for me the question, which I think is relevant for many, that these are maybe stories of parents or grandparents, but they are present in second generation and even third generation growing up. And like, what is it that you get from it? Not like getting not, like good or bad, or what do you feel that you grew up with as a second generation? I'm sure you speak about this in the book, but I think it's a very important notion that the second generation is a story, if you know what
Yeah,
I mean.
well, one of the things that I read recently, and now I'm sorry I can't remember the source, was that a lot of second generation Holocaust survivors have a lot of the feelings that people who went through it kind of shut down about. So, and weren't able to really process. Most people, um, my father's age, uh, didn't do things like go to therapy, um, write a book, um, have discussions to try to get over things. It just, you kind of like you tried to get through things and did the best you could that way. And so I think that people in my generation tend to be asking questions more and trying to, what does it mean now and what does it mean for the next generation?
Thank you so much. I see a few more questions that came in. So Marianne is asking that you wrote about when you mentioned how to write a book, rinse and repeat, and if you can share a bit what you meant by this.
Yeah. So, thanks for asking that question. So what I mean by that, that used to be the shampoo ad. You wash and then you rinse and then you repeat. But so, you can't really get the story out of your head once it's in there, but you can make it so that you um, can touch it without feeling quite so much pain each time. And that's the kind of healing that there is. It's not like you never think about it again, but you can keep going back to it, but it's not as painful.
Thank you so much. And I don't see now more questions, so maybe this will be a closing comment. Um, sorry, just I see one more comment. So yeah, Grace, thank you also for your comment and thank you for sharing your book. I saw that Grace shared also. She wrote a second generation Holocaust memoir. So those of you who are interested.
I wonder if I could just add a little to what was just said, because the point is that this book that just, my memoir that just came out, Winter Light, is in fact, I was told, one of the few, or maybe the only second generation memoir where I am telling my story as a child of survivors. Both my parents were in concentration camps in Poland. But the story, of course, I speak about them very much, but I do talk very much about the intergenerational trauma and how I tried so hard to overcome the trauma in order to live a decent life. And I feel very grateful that I was able to do so by reaching out to just, I feel very fortunate. I reached out to the right people somehow, the right time. I think it was some kind of divine intervention, who knows? But that's what my book is about. It's about going forward from that trauma and finding out, well, what happened to the children? Because there are so many, there are enough Holocaust survivor children who do not, as you were just saying, who do not have the wherewithal or the emotional, whatever it is, to write their stories. So my publisher was very happy to publish my book because it is literally the only book that really focuses on one child of survivors and how she tried so hard to overcome and live a life in her own, way, in spite of her parents, my parents, who thought that what I was trying to do, in other words, be out there in the world, I was eager to be like my other classmates who were not survivors, and many were not Jewish. But I grew up in Montreal, by the way, Montreal, Canada, but luckily in a French Canadian neighborhood, which offered me joie de vivre. So it gave me a way forward to something positive.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you so much, Grace. Sorry, we'll jump back to Jennifer, but thank you
of
so much
course,
for
and I hope it
sharing.
came out. I hope it came out in the little chat.
Yeah, yes, we received. So those of you who are interested in Grace's book, she put it in the chat. Thank you so much also for sharing it.
Hey, I
Uh,
just
Thank you for
raised
letting
one
me know.
final question.
sorry?
I say, could I just raise one final question to Jenny?
Yes, so one final question from you, and then I'll read one comment to close.
Great, thank you so much. Jenny, first of all, thank you so much that you made me aware of the webinar in my time dimensions at a later point in time. Thank you very much also for making us aware of this second generation drama. And as you know, I have been involved in a way by also listening to many stories from Berleburg, but I never thought about this. And I think it's an extremely important dimension that we should add. And again, thank you so much for this. And one light question at the end: when can we expect your next book?
Hopefully in 2026 or 7. I would love to come see you again. Thank you, Ulrich.
Thanks.
Thank you. And there are many comments from those who have read your book and those who just met you now, but they are congratulating you. And I'll just read out one as a closing comment from Lisa. She says, "Thank you so much for your courage and commitment to this work. It is such an engaging and well-written book about an unshakable tragedy and still has humor and light and hope. You have made an important contribution." So I thought that that was a lovely comment to close with. So thank you everyone who shared thoughts and comments and questions. We are always really glad to have you here, and thank you as always for your curiosity and interest in our events. We really hope that you enjoyed it, and of course we will share tomorrow all the details. We will share Jennifer's email address and website and Substack and where you can follow her and where you can buy this book if you'd like to read it. And we'll also share with you this recording, and it will be available. So if you want to share with friends or family, you're welcome to do so. And finally, I'd like to thank Jennifer for being here and sharing your story and book with us. We really appreciate it.
And thank you too, Dora and Sebastian.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining, and we wish you a wonderful rest of the day or good night. And we hope to see you all soon. We have one more event before Hanukkah, which will be on Thursday about Jewish artists. It's also a bit of a special talk. And then this coming Sunday, we won't have a talk because we hope everyone will be celebrating the first night of Hanukkah. So happy Hanukkah, everyone, and we hope to see
חג
you.
שמח. חג שמח.
Chag Sameach. Thank you
Hag
for joining.
Sameach from California.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Dora.
A good yontif in Yiddish.